They thought they could corner him with loaded questions, cameras rolling to capture his expected stumble. His simple truth cut through the staged narrative. Suddenly, the whole conversation shifted forever. The Moscone Center in San Francisco gleamed like a monument to innovation, early morning sunlight streaming through vast glass walls, catching on chrome and brushed steel. The Future Forward Tech Summit had transformed the space into something almost transcendent. Screens pulsing with data, prototype displays humming with potential, the air itself charged with ambition. But beneath the polished surface, tension coiled. Jessica Winters. Press credentials hanging like a badge or a weapon against her crisp white blouse, adjusted her blazer, smoothing her already perfect hair. 15 years at Progressive Tech Journal had made her reputation unshakable, her articles sharp, her interviews more like dissections. "You're set, Jessica," her producer Mark whispered through her earpiece. She barely nodded, scanning the crowd of tech executives, VCs, and startup founders, all here for one thing: Elon Musk's keynote and the rare open Q&A session. Jessica had spent 6 weeks preparing, compiling environmental data, crafting questions designed to corner, trap, expose. Her cameraman Ryan, leaning casually against a side wall, was already in position. He knew exactly what moments would make headlines, what would generate the clicks, the views, the outrage. The crowd shifted as summit organizers finalized the stage. 40 minutes to Musk's presentation, 10 for the initial softball questions, then her moment. "Remember the angle," Mark's voice crackled. "Climate hypocrisy is trending." She didn't need the reminder. This was what she did. Across the room, a tech blogger caught her eye, his friendly expression turning wary in an instant. They all knew why she was here. Jessica scrolled through her prepared questions, each one crafted to sound objective while leading inevitably to confrontation. Then Ryan gave a subtle motion with his camera. Musk had entered through a side door. No entourage, no spectacle. Just a man in a black t-shirt, jeans, and a bomber jacket, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to announce himself. Jessica watched as he paused to speak with a young engineer, listening, laughing, not the calculated performance she expected. The summit director whispered something to him, and Musk's gaze flicked across the room, pausing, just for a second, on Jessica. It wasn't recognition of her specifically, but of what she represented. A challenge. Then he looked away, continuing his conversation. But Jessica had seen the flicker of awareness, the signal that someone had spotted the trap before it was sprung. "We need something explosive," Mark pressed. Of course they did. That was the game. Conflict, spectacle, headlines. The crowd thickened, energy building. Volunteers ushered attendees to seats, lights dimming just slightly to focus attention on the stage. Jessica took her position, close enough to reach a microphone, far enough to observe. Ryan's camera light blinked red, ready. The stage was set, the players in position. But today's performance wouldn't follow her script at all. The trap she had so carefully laid was about to become her own. The Moscone Center hummed with anticipation as Elon Musk took the stage. No dramatic entrance, no elaborate introduction, just a man stepping into the light, his presence instantly commanding attention. Phones lifted, screens illuminated, capturing the moment as the massive display behind him flickered with a simple question. What if we're thinking too small? His voice, clear and unforced, carried across the space, not performative, but undeniably compelling. Jessica Winters leaned forward, studying his cadence, searching for weaknesses, for the cracks that would make her confrontation most effective. He's starting with the usual visionary stuff. Stay focused on our angle. Her producer Mark buzzed in her earpiece, but she barely acknowledged it. 15 years of takedowns, and they still thought she needed coaching. Musk moved effortlessly across the stage. No notes, no teleprompter, just ideas flowing. Part engineer, part dreamer, part something else entirely. The audience was captivated, executives nodding, venture capitalists leaning in, even skeptics listening intently. But Jessica wasn't here to be inspired. She was waiting, dissecting, preparing. Ryan, her cameraman, subtly adjusted his angle, capturing her sharp focus before shifting back to Musk as he detailed breakthrough battery technology, environmental impact, and the future of sustainable energy. The presentation was moving faster than expected, more substance than spectacle. Filled with data, candid discussions of failure, and an openness that almost disarmed her. For a moment, she nearly forgot why she was there, almost caught in the pull of possibility until Mark's voice cut through the moment. Remember the lithium mining angle, the water usage contradictions, the carbon footprint reality. She straightened, refocusing, her mind locking back onto the confrontation ahead. As Musk's talk shifted from technological breakthroughs to deeper philosophical territory, his voice dropped slightly, forcing the crowd to lean in. "We keep thinking of sustainability as sacrifice," he said. "What if it's actually about more?" Jessica watched the audience, recognizing the transformation. This was what made him dangerous, the ability to make people believe. Across the room, Ryan raised an eyebrow slightly. "Are you seeing this?" But she hardened herself against it. The summit director stepped forward, announcing Q&A. Musk offering more time than expected. And Jessica tensed, ready. But then Musk spoke again, his tone casual yet firm. "I'd prefer questions from people who are building something, creating, not just critiquing." Jessica's breath caught. Was that aimed at her? Had he already sensed the trap? Mark's voice was sharp now. "Don't let that stop you. We need this moment." Jessica nodded imperceptibly, her resolve solidifying. As the first questions began, timelines, specs, projections, all answered with deliberate thoughtfulness. Then, her moment. She raised her hand higher, heart pounding with the familiar prey-confrontation adrenaline that had fueled her career. The summit director pointed her way, and as the microphone was placed in her hand, camera lights intensified. As if the room itself recognized what was coming, she stood, smoothing her blazer, and delivered her opening move. "Mr. Musk, I'd like to address the disconnect between your environmental messaging and Tesla's actual manufacturing impact." The room tensed. Ryan's camera zoomed in, catching every flicker of expression. Musk didn't rush to respond, didn't scramble to fill the silence. A mistake so many had made before. Instead, he studied her, considering not just her words, but something deeper, the trap she had set, the performance she was staging. Then, he smiled. Not defensive, not confrontational, something else entirely. And in that instant, Jessica realized this wasn't going to follow her script at all. "That's an interesting framing," Musk said, his voice even, not defensive, not combative, just present in a way that made Jessica's question feel smaller than when she'd asked it. "I'm curious what specific disconnect you believe exists." Jessica felt the shift, the subtle way he had redirected, placing the burden of specificity on her. But she was prepared. Weeks of research. "Tesla claims to lead the environmental revolution," she pressed, gripping the microphone. "Yet your lithium mining operations consume millions of gallons of water in drought-prone regions. Your factories have faced environmental violations. The carbon footprint of manufacturing each vehicle is substantial." The audience tensed, leaning in, controversy creating its own gravity. "Perfect," she thought, "exactly as planned." Mark's voice hummed in her ear. "Keep pushing, get a reaction." But Musk didn't react. Instead, he turned to the entire audience. "Those are important concerns," he said. "And you're right, manufacturing at scale, even with the best intentions, has an environmental impact." The room stilled. No denial, no corporate deflection. "We actually published a report last quarter detailing our water usage, emissions, and remediation efforts. It's public, with raw data." Jessica felt a slight shift beneath her, but stayed on course. "Reports can be curated, Mr. Musk. Your claims rely on decades-ahead projections while the damage happens now." She built momentum, her words sharper, the kind of confrontation that made her career. Phones recorded. The moment intensified. The audience wanted this. Conflict, spectacle, a takedown. But Musk didn't push back. Instead, he studied her. Not defensive, not dismissive, curious. That's partially accurate, and he said, but I think it misses something important. Jessica didn't let him pivot. What's important, she cut in, is that while you're selling environmental salvation, your own SEC filings show massive resource consumption. The contradiction seems worth examining. Mark's voice, that's it. Keep him on defense. But Musk wasn't on defense. He wasn't following the script. You've done your research, he acknowledged, and those concerns are legitimate. I won't pretend our manufacturing has zero impact. That would be dishonest. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This wasn't expected. Jessica had prepared for denial, spin, evasion. Instead, Musk asked, "Aren't we comparing the wrong things?" Jessica moved to block the pivot. "The question is about accountability, Mr. Musk, the gap between marketing and verifiable reality." Her voice, sharp, precise. The audience leaned in. "Is it about accountability?" Musk countered, "or is it about perspective?" Jessica's pulse quickened. He wasn't counterpunching, he was reframing. Tesla marketing promises EVs are a step away from fossil fuels, not impact-free. Our reports acknowledge trade-offs, the engineering briefings, the environmental data, the challenges. Jessica wasn't used to this. Executives who owned flaws before being forced to. But she adapted. "You speak of transparency," she pressed, "yet your factories have faced multiple violations. Workers report unsafe conditions. Your response has been dismissive at best." The room tightened. This was where most executives crumbled, defensive, angry, exposed. This was the viral moment. "Now we've got him," Mark urged. Ryan zoomed in, perfect framing, perfect moment. But Musk did something unexpected. He went quiet, not out of hesitation, out of reflection. "You're right," he finally said. "We've failed in those instances, been too slow to respond, have more work to do on chemical handling, safety." Jessica blinked, not just at the admission, but at its directness. The crowd murmured, off guard, surprised. "But here's what I think is interesting," Musk continued. "We're debating whether Tesla is perfect instead of whether it's better than the alternative." Jessica recognized the pivot. "So you're justifying environmental damage today for potential benefits tomorrow?" Her voice carried the perfectest edge, forcing a cornered response. But Musk smiled, not defiant, not trapped, engaged. "No," he said. "I'm saying something different. Hold Tesla accountable, push us to improve, but understand, manufacturing anything at scale has impact. The real question isn't whether it has impact, but whether the net effect moves us in the right direction." Jessica felt it. Her narrative slipping. This wasn't the Musk she had prepared for. This wasn't the confrontation she had planned. And as he continued, his voice calm but certain, the ground beneath her shifted. The trap she had set was dissolving before her eyes. Jessica Winters felt the moment slipping, like sand between her fingers. 15 years of confrontational interviews had taught her to recognize when a target was escaping, when carefully laid traps were failing. Change tactics. Get personal. His tweets, his wealth, anything to get a reaction, Mark urged through her earpiece. She steadied herself. "Mr. Musk," she pressed, gripping the microphone tighter. "It's easy to talk about net positives when you're worth billions, while the communities bearing the environmental costs don't share in those benefits. Don't you think there's something fundamentally unjust about privatizing profits while socializing environmental damage?" The audience tensed, the attack hanging in the air. The turning point. Ryan's camera zooming in, ready for Musk's reaction. But something unexpected happened. Musk set his microphone down, stepped away from the podium, moving closer, not defensive, not retreating, but engaged. "You know," he said, his voice softer now, "I think that's actually the most important question you've asked so far." The room fell silent, even the ambient noise of shifting bodies and tapping screens fading away. "There's something profound there," he continued, "about who bears the costs of any transition, of any attempt to address the massive challenges we face. Jessica waited for the pivot, the deflection, the standard billionaire response about job creation and economic impact, but it didn't come. "I think about this a lot," Musk admitted, his voice quiet, unexpectedly real. And for the first time, Jessica hesitated. "We're trying to transition an entire planetary economy from one energy system to another, from one approach to transportation to something fundamentally different. And yes, there are costs. There are communities impacted. There are valid criticisms about who benefits first." The audience leaned in, still recording, but now engaged in a different way. This wasn't confrontation anymore. This was conversation. Something authentic. Even Jessica felt it, and suddenly her prepared follow-ups seemed hollow. "I don't have a perfect answer," Musk admitted. "And maybe that's something people like me don't say often enough. The systems we're working within are deeply flawed. The transition is messy, imperfect, painful, even when we're trying to do right." Mark's voice cut in. "Push harder. Don't let him off the hook." But for the first time in her career, Jessica removed her earpiece, let it dangle at her side. Ryan caught it on camera. The moment the game changed. Musk kept speaking, not to defend, not to win, but to engage with something real. "We published something recently that didn't get much attention, a comprehensive analysis of every environmental impact, not just the positives. Water usage, mineral sourcing, manufacturing emissions, with specific measurable commitments for improvement, and a framework for communities most affected to hold us accountable." The silence in the room shifted from expectant tension to deep attention. Jessica found herself listening, not for weakness, but for understanding. There would be no viral takedown, no career-making confrontation, but something more important, Oriasis, was unfolding. "Mr. Musk," she asked, her voice softer now, "what would meaningful accountability actually look like?" Their eyes met, something passing between them. "Let me show you something," Musk said, turning to the screen behind him. A document appeared, not a polished PR piece, but a raw, detailed framework. Direct community representation on oversight boards, transparent quarterly reporting on all environmental metrics, third-party verification, profit sharing for impacted communities, real redress mechanisms when Tesla failed to meet its standards. The room was transformed. Executives took notes, activists expecting a fight were now documenting instead. Reevaluating in real time, Ryan widened the shot, capturing the shift from cynicism to cautious engagement. Jessica felt something unfamiliar. Not the rush of a takedown, but the quiet weight of something that actually mattered. "Is this perfect?" Musk asked, looking directly at her. "Number. It's a starting point, a framework that must evolve as we learn, as we listen, as we face the real challenges of transforming how humans interact with this planet." He paused. "And I want to thank you for asking these questions, for pushing for accountability. Because without that pressure, without that scrutiny, we wouldn't build better systems." The words hung in the air, genuine, unexpected, revolutionary in their simplicity. Jessica Winters, who had come to expose, to attack, to create conflict, found herself nodding, found herself engaged in something deeper than a headline. And in that moment, everything changed. Not just the interview, not just the event, but the conversation itself. The Comascone Center felt different now. The air itself transformed as something authentic replaced the manufactured tension. Jessica still stood, microphone in hand, but she was no longer the same journalist who had entered that morning, armed with carefully crafted traps and practiced confrontational techniques. Instead, she found herself asking, what if we look at specific communities where Tesla operates? How would this accountability framework address their immediate concerns? Her voice carried genuine curiosity now, the aggressive edge gone. The audience noticed the shift, phones still recording, but differently, capturing not conflict, but connection, not takedown, but transformation. Musk nodded, pulling up detailed maps, impact assessments, and community feedback mechanisms. That's exactly the right question, he said, revealing new policies already in place: water usage monitoring, air quality testing, profit-sharing structures, designed to ensure communities directly benefited from Tesla's operations. Ryan had abandoned his original filming plan, no longer searching for confrontational moments, but documenting something more valuable: the emergence of a new corporate responsibility model. Executives who had come for innovation insights were furiously taking notes. Activists who had expected combat were instead engaging with the specifics of Tesla's accountability framework. For the first time in her career, Jessica found herself in conversation, not interrogation. "What about communities already impacted by past operations?" she asked. Musk didn't deflect. "We owe them reparative action," he said simply, explaining Tesla's new community-led compensation fund. The room hummed, not with conflict, but with possibility. Then, at the edge of her vision, Mark appeared, his face tense with frustration, gesturing for Jessica to get back on script, to create the moment they had come. For the viral confrontation, the takedown. But she couldn't hear his voice anymore, the earpiece dangling, unused. She couldn't return to that space where manufactured outrage mattered more than meaningful dialogue. "This isn't just about Tesla," Musk continued. "This is about creating a template for how all companies should operate. Everything, the frameworks, the data, the mistakes, and the successes, open source, available to anyone." Jessica nodded. Her next question coming not from prepared notes, but from genuine engagement. "How do you ensure corporate interests don't eventually override community concerns once the spotlight fades?" It was the question that mattered, the one at the heart of environmental justice. Musk didn't rush to answer, didn't offer platitudes or easy assurances. He thought. "That's the most important challenge," he admitted. "Because history shows us that good intentions fade against financial pressures, shareholder demands, and the relentless drive for profit." The audience leaned in further, executives and environmental activists alike, recognizing the rarity of a CEO acknowledging the fundamental tension at the heart of corporate responsibility. "Our approach," Musk explained, "is to build accountability into our corporate structure itself: legally binding community oversight, independent verification, financial penalties for non-compliance that flow directly to impacted communities, but most importantly, genuine partnership, where these communities have actual decision-making authority." Ryan's camera panned across the room, capturing faces shifting from skepticism to consideration. As cynicism gave way to engagement, Jessica felt something shift within herself. 15 years spent exposing contradictions, generating viral moments of conflict, and now, standing in this transformed space, she wondered what journalism could be if it prioritized understanding over attack, solution-seeking over spectacle. Mark was still gesturing furiously, his face reddening as the confrontation he had meticulously planned dissolved into something more valuable, but less viral, less clickable, less suited to their usual format. Musk, sensing the shift, looked directly at Jessica. "It's easy to criticize," he said, "not with judgment, but observation. It's much harder to build, to solve, to improve imperfectly, step by step, while facing valid criticism." Jessica felt her professional persona transforming. In real time, and when she spoke again, her question emerged from a different place. "What's the most important thing other companies could learn from this approach?" Musk smiled, not the polished, rehearsed keynote smile, but the genuine expression of someone in real dialogue. "That progress isn't perfect," he said. "That accountability matters. That affected communities deserve not just consultation, but authority. And most importantly, that we can do hard things together if we're willing to have real conversations about real challenges, without performance, without posturing, without needing to be perfectly right or to prove others perfectly wrong." The room erupted in applause. Not the polite professional kind, but something deeper, more human. Jessica stood, microphone in hand, watching as the moment unfolded, not just around her, but beyond her, despite her. And Ryan caught it all, his camera documenting not just an event, but a transformation in real time before their eyes. Within minutes of the exchange, the digital world exploded. Clips spread across platforms, moving at the speed of light and outrage, except this time, the outrage wasn't directed where expected. Mark stood in the Moscone Center lobby, face flushed with anger and disbelief, staring at his phone as notifications cascaded like digital raindrops. Viewers weren't celebrating the planned takedown or if of a tech billionaire, they were witnessing something else entirely. Elon Musk transforms hostile interview into masterclass on environmental accountability. Read one headline already trending. Reporter abandons gotcha questions when confronted with actual solutions, proclaimed another. This wasn't the story they had come for. Wasn't the viral moment Progressive Tech Journal had planned. Mark called the network executives, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We need to control this narrative," he insisted, but the response from the other end was clear. "It's too late. It's everywhere." Jessica emerged from the main hall, her professional demeanor intact, but something in the way she carried herself had fundamentally changed. Ryan followed, camera lowered, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said quietly, "this might be the most important thing we've ever captured. Not what we planned, but what happened." Jessica nodded, but didn't speak. She couldn't yet put into words the transformation she had experienced, from hunter to listener, critic to participant. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, colleagues, competitors, viewers, all wanting to understand how the narrative had shifted so completely. But the story was already writing itself across digital space. Twitter flooded with clips, not of confrontation, but of something rarer, genuine dialogue. "This is what accountability actually looks like," wrote a prominent environmental activist, sharing the moment Musk detailed community oversight and profit sharing. "Can we talk about how Jessica Winters just modeled what journalism should be?" commented a media professor, attaching the clip of her removing her earpiece, choosing to listen instead of attack. Even Mark's phone couldn't escape the narrative tsunami. His own network's social media manager had already shared the full exchange with a simple caption: "This changes everything." Inside the Moscone Center, the scheduled program continued, but something had fundamentally shifted. The performative posturing disappeared, replaced by genuine engagement with Musk's accountability framework. Executives approached microphones not to grandstand, but to ask how they could implement similar approaches. Jessica watched from the back, no longer the aggressor, but a witness to something real. Mark stormed toward her, voice low but intense. "What the hell happened in there?" he demanded. "You had him cornered. You had the perfect setup." Jessica met his glare, steady, unshaken. "I found a better story." Mark shook his head, furious. "This isn't what we discussed. This isn't what we planned. This will never get the engagement, the clicks, the shares we needed." Jessica glanced at her phone, the explosion of responses, the trending topics, the viewer numbers climbing exponentially, surpassing anything their manufactured confrontation could have delivered. "I think you're wrong about that," she said, pointing to the trending topics shifting from Musk Confronted and Tesla Exposed to corporate accountability framework and journalism transformation. Outside, media vans arrived, networks scrambling, not to cover the takedown that never happened, but the breakthrough that did. Environmental groups issued statements, not condemning Musk as planned, but cautiously optimistic, calling for other corporations to adopt similar frameworks. Ryan's phone buzzed. His footage had already hit 1 million views, not with trolls and outrage, but with thoughtful engagement. Questions about implementation, accountability, and the future of corporate responsibility. Jessica scrolled through her feed, watching the conversation expand beyond personalities and politics, beyond the usual digital division, toward something more substantial. Her colleague Sophia texted from New York. "What did you do? The network is freaking out. The executives are in emergency meetings, but the numbers are insane. Back inside, Musk continued speaking, not defending, but building on the conversation, each response forming an expanding circle of engagement rather than a defensive perimeter. A tweet from a climate scientist went viral. Did we just witness the creation of a new corporate environmental accountability standard? Jessica's feed filled with interview requests, not about her confrontational tactics, but about her shift in perspective. What made her change course? What made her abandon the planned attack and engage with solutions instead? Mark paced the lobby, still making calls, still trying to reclaim control of a narrative that had already outgrown the narrow confines of provocation. His phone buzzed, a text from the network's social media manager. Stop panicking, this is gold. Different than expected, but better. Engagement metrics are breaking records across demographics we never reach. By late afternoon, the digital conversation had shifted entirely. Instead of the expected endorse, Musk called out. Headlines, new topics dominated. Corporate environmental justice, a new standard for accountability, journalism rethought. The online world, so often driven by conflict, had for once turned its attention to base solutions. Jessica finally answered one text from her editor-in-chief. With a simple message, I found a better way forward. Then she silenced her phone. Watching the continued Moabasti dialogue unfold. In the main hall, where executives and activists, groups so often at odds, were now finding unexpected common ground in the frameworks Musk had presented. Ryan approached, his camera packed away, but his mind still turning. You know, he said quietly, in 15 years of filming, I've never seen anything like that. Jessica nodded. She understood completely. This wasn't just a story changing. This was an entire approach transforming, from conflict to collaboration, from criticism to construction, from division to unity. And as the numbers soared, as the conversations deepened, as the unexpected ripples spread, one thing became clear. What happened in that room wasn't the failure of a takedown. It was the beginning of something that might actually matter. 3 days after the Moscone Center exchange, the ripples had become waves, crashing against established norms and reshaping the media landscape. Jessica Winters sat in her apartment, watching as the story unfolded beyond her control, beyond anyone's, taking on a life of its own. Progressive Tech Journal. Executives had called an emergency strategy meeting. Their entire approach suddenly questioned, not just by viewers or critics, but by their own staff, reporters who had witnessed what happened when journalism transcended takedowns, when listening replaced attacking, when solutions outshined criticisms. 4 major tech companies had already announced they were reviewing Tesla's framework, considering similar accountability structures for their own environmental impacts. Financial analysts noted something unexpected. Tesla's stock hadn't plummeted, as controversy usually dictated, but had steadied, strengthened, as investors recognized the long-term value of community partnership over conflict, of transparency over obfuscation. The video had been viewed 60 million times, cutting across demographics, reaching people who normally ignored corporate policy or environmental frameworks. Jessica's phone rang again. Another interview request, this time from a major network, not to discuss Musk or Tesla specifically, but to explore what had happened in that room, the moment journalism transformed from performance to purpose. She declined, still processing, still reflecting on 15 years spent building a career on confrontation, on criticism, on conflict, and the unexpected realization that something else entirely might actually matter more. Mark had been reassigned, moved from producer to consultant, the network's way of acknowledging failure while saving face. His replacement, Diane, called that morning, her voice cautious but determined. We need to talk about your next piece. What angle are you thinking? Jessica considered the question, realized she no longer wanted in space. Angles no longer sought conflict for its own sake. "I'm thinking about exploring corporate accountability structures that actually work," she said finally. "Frameworks that go beyond performance, beyond superficial ESG metrics, toward genuine community partnership." Silence stretched across the line before Diane responded, measured but intrigued. "That's different for us. But the numbers don't lie. People engage with this in ways we've never seen." Across the media landscape, similar conversations unfolded. Editorial meetings questioning the reliance on outrage-driven engagement, the fixation on divisive framing, the manufactured conflicts that had seemed like industry necessities, but were now being exposed as choices about approach, purpose, and focus. Environmental groups released position papers, analyzing Tesla's accountability framework, identifying strengths, weaknesses, and possibilities. With nuance rarely seen in public discourse, universities scheduled panels. Making the framework required reading in business schools, law programs, and environmental science departments. Meanwhile, Ryan had received job offers from 3 major networks, all wanting to understand how he had captured something so unexpectedly powerful. He declined them all, choosing instead to develop a documentary series on what happens when journalism prioritizes solutions over takedowns, understanding over outrage. The tech industry felt the shift most acutely, CEOs requesting briefings on Tesla's approach, communications teams rethinking strategies, sustainability officers studying frameworks, board members questioning whether conflict was inevitable or optional, whether different relationships were possible with communities, with critics, with the public. Musk himself had said little since that afternoon, letting the framework speak for itself, allowing the approach, not the personality, not the politics, to spread on its own merits. Jessica scrolled through her emails, pausing at one from an environmental justice advocate who had been present that day. "Thank you for listening, for changing course, for showing what's possible when we move beyond performative conflict." She read it twice, considering the unexpected gratitude for what she had initially seen as failure, an abandonment of her role, her purpose, but had instead become something entirely new. Her editor-in-chief finally called, voice cautious but curious. "So what happened in there, Jessica? What made you change course?" She considered the question, thought back to the exact moment when manufactured outrage felt hollow in the face of genuine engagement. "I realized," she said finally, "that I was performing a role I'd played 1,000 times before, creating conflict for its own sake, when something more important was actually happening." The editor was silent for a moment before asking the question everyone seemed to be asking. "Where do we go from here?" Jessica looked at her notebook, now filled not with gotcha questions, not with traps and triggers, but with ideas, frameworks, possibilities. "I think we start by asking different questions," she said. "Not just what's wrong, but what could work. Not just who's to blame, but how we move forward. Not just what divides us, but what we might build together." Across the media landscape, similar realizations dawned. Not everywhere, not completely. The machinery of outrage still churned. But something had shifted. A door had opened, revealing different possibilities. For journalism, for discourse, for tackling complex challenges. The metrics told their own story. Solution-focused content reached wider audiences, viewer retention climbed, engagement deepened. As people gravitated not just toward conflict, but progress, not just criticism, but possibility. Some networks resisted, clinging to familiar formulas, the comfort of provocation, but others saw the opening, the chance to create journalism that engaged differently, served differently, mattered differently. Jessica finally answered one last email, this time from a journalism student who had watched the exchange, the transformation, the moment everything changed. "You showed me a different way forward, a different purpose for the work. She replied simply, truthfully, "I'm still learning it myself, still discovering what journalism might be when it seeks not just to expose what's broken, but to explore what might work instead. When it values not just conflict, but collaboration, not just criticism, but contribution. When it remembers that its highest purpose isn't generating clicks or views, but serving the public good through truth, through understanding, through the possibilities that emerge when we finally start listening." 1 month after the Moscone Center exchange. Jessica Winters stood at the edge of a stage, not as an interrogator, but as a speaker, addressing a packed auditorium at the Columbia School of Journalism. Students, professors, and working journalists had gathered to understand what had happened that day, how a single interview had just sparked a conversation still growing, still evolving. "I came to that interview," she began, "with 15 years of muscle memory, questions designed to trap, not illuminate, approaches built to expose, not understand, a career constructed on conflict because that's what we believed worked, that's what drove engagement, that's what journalism had become." The room was silent, not just students that's learning technique, but seasoned journalists questioning purpose. Across the media landscape, ripples had become waves, and waves had become currents, pulling journalism toward different shores. 3 major networks had since launched initiatives focused on solutions-based reporting, rethinking their dependency on outrage-driven content. Tesla's accountability structure had been implemented by 14 companies, studied by 30 universities, adapted by environmental organizations. Not as a PR move, but because it worked, because it offered something beyond the usual corporate performance theater. In the back of the auditorium, Ryan filmed, not for a viral moment, but for his newly acquired documentary series, Beyond Conflict, The Future of Journalism, which focused not on takedowns, but on what becomes possible when journalism prioritizes progress over provocation. Jessica continued, showing engagement metrics that defied conventional wisdom. Solution-focused content, outperforming conflict-driven reporting, thoughtful analysis, reaching audiences that had long abandoned traditional news, proving that the divide between what mattered and what worked had always been a false choice. Even Progressive Tech Journal had undergone its own transformation, its new executive team recognizing opportunity in the crisis, launching a dedicated accountability desk, focused not just on what was broken, but what could be fixed, adapted, and scaled. Meanwhile, Musk had expanded the framework, inviting critics, competitors, and independent stakeholders to refine and strengthen the accountability model, proving it was never about a brand or a personality, but about a system that could function beyond its creator. On screen, Jessica played a recent clip from a community meeting in Nevada, where local residents, environmental advocates, corporate leaders, and policymakers sat, not in opposition, but in collaboration, discussing water usage, mineral sourcing, and energy transition with transparency, with respect, with purpose. The students watched intently, not seeing abstract theory, but real-world application. As the questions afterward revealed the shift, no one asked how to craft better confrontations, how to engineer outrage, how to trap subjects more effectively. Instead, they asked, how do we build bridges across divides? How do we illuminate solutions alongside problems? How do we serve audiences who are hungry for progress, not just conflict? Jessica answered Moiko thoughtfully. Oh, still, Mai, learning herself, still discovering what journalism might become when it remembers its highest purpose. Then a professor raised his hand, asking what the question at the heart of the skepticism surrounding this shift. What about accountability? Doesn't this approach risk going too soft on power, letting corporations off the hook? Jessica nodded. Accountability matters, perhaps more than anything. But there are different paths to truth, different ways to hold power responsible. Confrontation is one tool, yes, but it's not the only tool, not always the best tool, especially when the confrontation itself becomes more important than the outcome it seeks. The room considered her words. Young journalists and seasoned professionals alike, weighing transformation against tradition, purpose against performance, possibility against familiar practice. Across the country, similar conversations were unfolding. Newsrooms reconsidering their approaches, universities reimagining curriculum, audiences engaging with content that offered not just problems, but possibilities, not just criticism, but creation, not just division, but direction. Jessica concluded her address with the question that had reshaped her own purpose. What if the greatest service we can offer isn't just exposing what's broken, but illuminating what might work, not just assigning blame, but exploring solutions, not just highlighting division, but building understanding across differences? The auditorium erupted in applause, not perfunctory politeness, but a genuine response to ideas that mattered. Afterward, students gathered around, not seeking techniques for confrontation, but approaches for connection, not asking how to create viral moments, but how to illuminate paths forward. Jessica spoke with each one, sharing not certainty, but exploration, not answers, but better questions. As she left the building that evening, stepping into New York's fading light, her phone buzzed. A notification that the accountability framework had been adopted by 3 more major corporations. The template spreading not through mandates, but through recognition. That different approaches might actually work better. That conflict wasn't inevitable. That collaboration wasn't naive. That progress was possible when purpose transcended performance, when listening replaced attacking, when understanding outshined outrage. And the story continued to unfold, not just about one exchange, one moment, one shift, but about what becomes possible when we dare to rethink our approaches, when we remember our deeper purpose, when we recognize the power not just of criticism, but of creation, not just of conflict, but of connection, not just of division, but of direction. If this story moved you, if it made you question what's possible for journalism, for discourse, for engaging with its complex challenges, share it. Because sometimes transformation doesn't begin with grand declarations, but with simple questions. What matters? What works? What might be possible if we dare to imagine different paths forward?